and welcome to the Group 1 presentation on library programming for teens. I'm Haley Scroggins.
I'm Josh Hill.
And I'm Candace Burkett. And today, we'll go over everything you need to know to become a teen programming pro, starting with the basic job requirements, then moving on to a tour of some of the major trends in teen spaces and teen programming.
We'll see how one library does their summer programming. And then we'll leave you with some practical tips and go-to resources for teen programming in your library.
Oh, wait a second, Haley. Just to make sure we're all on the same page here, what exactly do you mean by teen programming? Is it anything like programming a robot to steal your coworker's candy stash?
Well, not exactly, Josh, but that's not a bad idea for a program. Let's keep it simple, though. Teen programs are public library services designed for young people, and the possibilities are endless.
And we'll be taking a look at the different skills and competencies librarians need in order to serve teens through library programming.
But before we get to how we can serve our patrons, we really need to understand who our patrons are.
What are they like? What are their needs? And how do they use the library?
By analyzing demographic information, connecting with teen-oriented community organizations, and most importantly, by interacting with teens and listening to them, we can get to know them a little better and start working out the kind of programming that would benefit them the most.
Contrary to any ugly rumors suggesting that the library is no longer relevant to younger generations, a study by the Pew Research Center found that teens are still just as likely to use the public library as the 30-plus crowd, and still value traditional library services alongside newer technological services.
Debunked myths aside, the most interesting difference between adults and teens isn't what library resources they're using, it's how teens are using the library. Teens today spend far more time in the library, using the library as a space in ways their parents never did. Generally, teens use the library space for reading, studying, and watching or listening to media. They also use it for collaboration, both online and in person, and sometimes it's just a great place to hang out.
It's also important for teens to have a separate physical space within the library to give them a sense of independence and ownership.
That, and it'll keep the old folks from shaking their canes in a crotchety fit at all the racket from your rowdy teen programs.
But to come up with a good teen program, it's not enough to just know who teens are. We need to learn to speak their language. According to ALA's Library of the Future, most of today's teens are digital natives. So librarians need to be digitally literate and up to date with the technologies teens are using and how they are using them.
At the same time, we can't overlook those teens who may have grown up with limited or no access to technology. So our programming should also help to bridge that gap. For librarians, honing our digital literacy skills is essential.
In this way, we can develop programming that helps teens build the digital competencies they'll need in order to
be successful in their careers, to contribute to their communities, to cultivate media literacy, and to explore the reaches of their own intellectual curiosities.
And here are a couple of programs that libraries have used to promote digital literacy.
Joliet Public Library, Illinois, designed a QR code treasure hunt that included author videos, Google Forms, and a variety of digital problem solving.
As a part of YALSA's Teen Tech Week, Los Alamos County Library in New Mexico sponsored a teen lock-in oriented around digital literacy. Tasks included editing a wiki page, testing the security of their passwords, and playing with the code of a website using Hackasaurus.
For librarians, collaboration is part of what makes us who we are and should be a part of everything we do. As we work to develop programming, we should be looking outward to similar service providers and looking inward to our teen patrons for feedback and even active participation in the programming process.
In most places, there's already a thriving network of individuals and groups dedicated to their teenage population.
Schools, community organizers, groups that promote diversity, and even online communities are all usually eager to promote with their local library. Still, nothing beats the kind of insider knowledge you can find with other librarians. Reaching out to experienced librarians is a shortcut to learning the ins and outs of programming without having to reinvent the wheel. So as we develop our own collaborative relationships, we can give our teens the chance to do the same by providing opportunities and spaces for them to collaborate freely with each other. Our program should be a safe place for teens to do things they couldn't have done on their own, because they should have plenty of opportunities to work with people who may not be like them.
Now that we've covered some of the basic qualities of a good teen programming librarian, let's zoom out enough to see what's making the biggest waves in the broader world of teen programming.
Over at the ALA Center for the Future of Libraries, they may not have an actual crystal ball, but there's no better place to go to see the big picture of where the library is and where it's headed. Of all the trends they're actively tracking, we've picked out a few that are particularly relevant to our topic.
First up, connected learning. Remember what we said about collaboration being a pretty big part of the whole librarian shtick? Well, it turns out that it's a pretty big deal everywhere. Connected learning is all about using technology to tap into a much bigger and more diverse pool of learning, which is not to be confused with our next trend, flipped learning.
Just like it sounds, flipped learning inverts the educational relationship so that students drive the learning process at their own pace. Public libraries were made for this. Incorporating both flipped and connected learning strategies into teen programming can give teens a more suitable learning environment than they might typically find in the classroom. Next up, the maker movement. Maker spaces are springing up in libraries across the country, and their popularity is no accident. The basic idea behind it is that we give teens the tools, resources, and physical space to create on their own terms.
So far, our exploration of teen programming hasn't strayed too far from the classroom lecture approach, but now it's time to head out into the field and get our hands on some real library programs. Candace, lead the way.
All right, so let's head over to Little Rock, Arkansas to check out their summer programming schedule for teens. This library has an entire floor devoted to young adults, giving them the space they need to learn and explore. So here's a look at the summer programming schedule, which is made available on the library's website. And the programming is 3 pages long, and it is still only considered to include some of the highlights of the programming. But the schedule includes programming about robotics and technology, crafts and DIY projects, gaming events and tournaments, movie nights, college preparation, and job hunting skills. So these were just a few examples, but there are other events on the calendar as well. But these are just some of the highlights and patterns we notice.
That's a great example of programming, Candace. But if our librarians really want teens to give up Fortnite for a library program, here's a few more things to keep in mind. I know, no one likes to talk about library policy when you could be slicing flying fruit with your teens in virtual reality, or schooling them in Game of Thrones trivia. But those things would be impossible without strong and consistently enforced policies. Along with your library's overall policies, establish policies for your programs that create a safe and welcoming environment.
Keep an eye out for those teens that always seem to fall between the cracks. From underserved populations to the kid whose mom drops him off at the library because he's just too difficult, or the kid who's too shy to speak up. Our libraries and programs are for everyone.
And lastly, make it fun. Odds are, if you aren't having fun, then your teens probably aren't either. Get creative, and don't be afraid to break something. Anyway, teens will probably think it's hilarious if you do.
Before we go, we've got a little something for you to take with you. These 2 resources are going to be your secret weapons as you combat the forces of illiteracy and boredom.
YALS's Teen Programming Guidelines is the best crash course for teen programming. I mean, other than this presentation, of course. But this is a great way to learn more about teen programming.
Now that you know the basics of teen programming, you're going to need a place to get ideas for programming and a place to connect with other teen planners to ask questions and evaluate your programs. Well, once again, YALSA's got you covered. At YALSA's Teen Programming HQ, you can join a community of teen programming librarians who are all sharing their programs and experiences.
Alright, so to wrap it all up, let's review the teen programming highlights. Teen programming is a job that requires you to learn more about your teen population to know how library programs can benefit them. And once you know what teens need, find ways to engage them on their terms and encourage collaboration. We also covered some of the biggest trends in teen programming and saw how the Central Arkansas Library put it into action. Remember to protect your teens and your library with good policy, to go out of your way to include everyone, and remember to have fun. Thanks again for joining us for this quick presentation of teen programming in the library.
This has been Josh
Haley.
And Candace.
Happy programming!